A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 75. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
75.
The big 7-5.
The Diamond Jubilee. The
75 and feeling alive.
I'm kind of, I will be honest, this kind of 75, we don't have anything really special planned or anything.
Yeah.
I would admit that 75 kind of snuck up on me.
Yeah.
Like 50 kind of snuck up on us and 75 kind of snuck up on us. So in the spirit of how we do things around here, I think we're going to celebrate it by just talking about Star Wars for
a couple
hours. And we weren't.
I mean, do you want to take stock of like where Star Wars and Lucasfilm are currently compared to like when we started doing this show?
That would be interesting. That's kind of.
Have you thought about it? I guess
I have question. in the idea that I guess we started this in April of 2015, right? That sounds right?
Right.
And right. Was that after so it was about the time of Celebration?
That sounds
Anaheim
right.
Celebration. So it's kind of like, well, I mean, I think a lot of people like myself were kind of just questioning what Disney was planning and how are you going to be able to have like a movie every year and it all seems so up in the air and I don't know. I honestly thought George Lucas actually was going to still be involved on some level.
Right.
And, I honestly didn't think that we were going to be, going into the third movie of a new trilogy with having one of the principals be gone.
Yeah.
I kind of was hoping, I don't know.
I think what you're getting at is that, there was a lot of kind of uncertainty around that time, and even, with the announcement and the sale and all of that, and that the announcements about what they were doing with the EU and the canon. I mean, I know we spent a bunch of time in those earlier episodes talking about like, what does canon even mean? And is it even important? And, how is that going to work? And does it matter for fans, like what they should be paying attention to and what they shouldn't be paying attention to? And, like you said, is a movie per year even going to work? And, who are they going to get to direct these things? And, but now I feel like we're in a place where, I mean, there are still questions about kind of future directions and, what's episode 8 and 9 going to look like? What are they going to, are they going to make another trilogy after episode 9? How many of these standalone movies are they going to do? So there are those kinds of questions, but I think we have enough kind of data at this point with what they're doing with the comics and the movies and the novels and everything else that we I feel like we do sort of know, at least with this, at this stage of the game, kind of what to expect. And there's something, I don't know if comforting is the right word, but there is something nice about that, even though it means, what we talk about is a little different, and certainly this will come up later in the show, I think, when we talk about what to expect from Celebration this year. A lot of content, a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what Star Wars fans talk about is now driven by the kind of movie release schedule, toy release schedule, book release schedule. It's more on Lucasfilm and Disney's terms, whereas maybe previously, there were the comic books and there were the books that were coming out, but beyond that, people could just like talk about whatever they want to talk about, and hey, let's spend a whole podcast episode talking about Padme as a character and where she fits in dramatically and how she compares to other characters in drama and things like that. Whereas now it's like, okay, Celebration's coming up. Here's what we know about the panels. This movie's coming out. What's going to happen in episode 8? What is Finn going to be doing? What is Poe Dameron going to be doing? It's definitely more, there are kind of more things to talk about in a way, but those things are definitely driven by what Disney and Lucasfilm are putting out there, which on the one hand is fine. But I do feel like at least now we're at this point, and by we, I mean not just you and me, but kind of other people who do these podcasts or have blogs or think about even just people at home thinking about Star Wars on their own time, right? There's not as much kind of long-term reflection on these characters, these stories, whatever. They're just kind of like in the moment, anticipation of what the next step is going to be.
I see what you mean. It's kind of like it's a lot of podcasts will do sometimes they'll kind of put the brakes on and they'll do an episode about something kind of in the past or something. But yeah, generally I feel like, well, us especially I think we're very motivated on, the hot, fresh news or whatever. We want to talk about that because it kind of comes at you so fast that it feels like, except for a couple weeks here and there, it's like there's always something to talk about. There's always something to speculate on. And most of it's in the future. It's like, I like to go back and reassess. I think when Rogue One comes out on video, I'm going to want to go back and, I'll be watching it a lot more frequently, and I'll probably want to reassess my viewpoints. But even though my viewpoints can kind of change, like some weeks I'll go, like even with The Force Awakens, I'll go like, I'll be watching The Force Awakens and I'll be thinking to myself, this is like, maybe I'm in a bad mood or something. I don't know why I would be thinking this, but I'm like, the act, it is kind of just a retread of A New Hope. And some of the acting is kind of like, it's like from a Disney TV show. And then sometimes I'll watch it and I'll think to myself, wow, this is really even though I started out and I think I was pretty vocal about not being excited about J.J. Abrams being involved, that you got to give the guy credit. He really did kind of knock it out of the park. Criticisms aside, that I've heard some pretty valid ones, but generally, for having the entire deck stacked against you, the only thing he had going for him was the support of Lucasfilm and a lot of money, which is, that's not to be underestimated how important that is.
It helps,
but the audience, I don't think generally the audience, which is outside the realm of even Star Wars fandom, was necessarily banking on this being a success. And having him having that have been a success, and I don't necessarily mean just by box office, I just mean, people were excited about Star Wars in a visceral way, 2 years ago, that I hadn't seen since, the 80s, or maybe even 20 years ago when the special editions came out. And that's a real achievement and the fact that he, I would have liked more Luke. The reveal, even though artistically it was kind of exciting, I felt like 30 years and I'm only getting one shot of Luke, but whatever. I think it was a pretty interesting achievement, but yeah, it's the kind of, going forward, it makes me wonder, it's like, how special are we going to have these kind of special things happen, like the teasers and even so, I think I might, and I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit. into news, but we'll talk about it again. But just the idea that we're starting to hear like, inferences that the teaser that's going to be played at Celebration is probably going to be more of a behind the scenes kind of thing rather than a theatrical teaser. And it's like, oh, so now they're kind of changing it up now. It's like, it's more of like, oh, we're not going to necessarily talk about the saga. We're going to kind of refer to the artistry of making the saga. And you're like, oh, well, really? That's going to be you really want that to be the first line of, contact between the fans, just the behind the scenes of it. You don't want to frame it like J.J. Abrams, or I don't know who came up with that teaser, that, the Boyega teaser where it's, he pops up. And I mean, that was pretty much a perfect teaser. It's like, even Rogue One was great, but they got to play with a toolbox of pre-existing things. And, obviously,
right, they could just show the Death Star and automatically get a reaction. Right? They had that kind of ace up their sleeve.
And I feel like every subsequent production kind of benefits from a fan base that has, is doing a lot of legwork for them. You know what I mean? It's like they're speculating, like, Woody Harrelson. Oh, I bet he's playing. They say he's playing Han Solo's mentor. Well, I bet he's playing Garrus Shrike. It's the idea, even though that they're wrong on some level,
right.
They're not.
Well, then you get a couple extra days of people talking about the movie, right? Of like, yes, it is Garrus Shrike, or no, it's not Garrus Shrike. But then, then people are talking about the Han Solo movie for a longer period than they might otherwise.
That's true.
Have been talking about the casting rumors, right? So I think that benefits them, even if it's not going to be Garrus Shrike,
right?
They still get. I mean, and I don't know that this is like Kathleen Kennedy's goal in all this, or whoever's goal, but I'm sure the marketing department isn't mad about it.
Right?
They're like, yeah, whatever works. Whatever gets us out there.
Yeah, I mean, and on a show level, it's kind of like, episode 75. I honestly was kind of shocked that we got. I thought we'd get bored. You know what I mean? I kind of thought we do this. I mean, the Talking Bird, the Eagleheart show was 12 episodes. That's including the last episode we did where we interviewed Jason and the guys from the show, and it was like, I think we actually, and then we did like a recap. So there was only 10 episodes, and it's like, that felt like, oh, like we did that. And I found notes some notes from those versions of the show, and they're just like pages and pages of notes. And I'm like, we don't really do it that way for this, which is nice, because I don't think we'd be able to maintain that breakneck speed. But I honestly thought it's like, oh, we'll do it. And then like the movie'd come out, and like some people had even asked, oh, the movie's out, so the show's over, right? I'm like, no, we're going to keep going. And then we've done it. And it's kind of like surprising, because at least for me as a fan of things, it kind of ebbs and flows, where it's like, yeah, Star Wars I've always been a fan, but my contact with it can kind of ebb and flow. There maybe a year where I don't even think about it. But then it's kind of like the where I'm at now, where it's like, oh, I'm not buying any toys. I'm not doing this. I got rid of all that stuff. And now it's like I'm on eBay, like looking up, like, ooh, how much is this blue snaggletooth worth? I mean, it's like, it's a little strange for me. It's like,
yeah,
I gotta, with the collecting thing, it's like, oh, well, I'm only going to do vintage Kenner stuff. And then I'm out buying the Black Series. I've been buying these Black Series Stormtroopers. Like every time I'm on Amazon waiting for the price to drop. And it's like, although I do need to slow down. I got all excited and I bought one of these, like, remember back in the day when they had the Darth Vader carry cases for the figures? It's like
yes,
Darth Vader's head, and it clamshells open and you put the figures. It's kind of like, I never had one of those. Partly because I had this thing about anthropomorphic, not anthropomorphic, but it's like when it's like, like if a toy is like
a face that you could split open down the middle.
Right. It's like on some level, I just don't like it. But then I thought, hey, what a great thing to buy cheaply. And I just store my extra figures in it for whatever. So I went and I found one, and I was all excited. And then I get home and I'm like cleaning it and all this crap. And then I realized I bought like a reissue from 2004. So I'm thinking like, oh, I got a good deal. It's a little beat up. And it's like, yeah, this thing is way too beat up for something that's only like 13 years old.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, I never thought, starting this, I'd be like going around and being like, buying these dumb toys and kind of like fretting about, why did I buy this? So on a personal level, that's kind of where I'm at with this, where it's like I understand that nobody's forcing me to do this, but I'm kind of doing it. And I'm like I was like dusting figures and whatnot the other day. And I'm thinking, really, this is what I do with my time now? But it's good. I'm not knocking Star Wars or the show. It's just kind of funny how it was like, we've gone this far with this, and it's surprising the things that when you engage in a project and it like kind of goes on a lot longer than you thought. We'll get busy and then we won't be able to do it. But it's still a thing I like doing, and I assume you still like doing, and yeah. And I like the fact
enjoy our weekly conversations, Robert.
Yes, as do I. And I like that people, that people listen to it, and we've had, I don't really know how downloads work and like what counts as whatever, but I mean, we've had downloads in Australia and France and the UK, Iran, we've had downloads. Although I think it's because every time I use that turn of phrase, the bird boys talk Turkey. I think what happens is because doesn't Iran border Turkey?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Every time Turkey's mentioned on the internet, that like the Iran has a web crawler that will grab anything that mentions Turkey or something.
That's funny.
I don't know. My wife says we should just enjoy the downloads, and I shouldn't speculate as to why they were downloaded. But
yeah, that's fine. Either way.
But no, it's been it's fun, and it continues to be fun, and I hope it continues to be fun. And I thank people for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've gotten feedback. Like I found out like I have cousins that listen to this show, and I'm like, really? And I felt bad, and I said, why? And it's like, well, that's not very nice to the people that take the time to listen. But I do if it, it's nice to hear that we do something that people enjoy. I guess is the long story short version of that.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Let's quit patting ourselves on the back, and let's get into some
let's talk some Star
news
Wars.
And commentary.
So, yeah, exactly. I guess the first thing we can start off with this week, there are a couple like small announcements, things that happened. So our quick news rundown. The first is that John Williams won a Grammy for the Force Awakens soundtrack. The category was Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media, which
what the heck is
I
that?
I assume that just means it lumps movies and TV together.
Oh.
Although visual media, maybe that also means video games. I don't know.
Oh, that might be true.
But I think it's mostly just movies plus TV, or mini series or whatever. Williams did not win the Oscar. The Oscar went to Ennio Morricone for The Hateful Eight. I mean, that was so long ago. When I saw the thing that he won a Grammy, I was like, this year? Wasn't that last year? But no, that was last year's, or who knows how long ago it was now. Well, yeah, I guess it would have been last year's Oscars, this year's Grammys. But we don't have to like rehash everything we thought about the soundtrack. I actually haven't listened to it in a little while because there was a while where I listened to it pretty often, but then I stopped. Once Rogue One came around, I was like, all right, I want to give, it's time to start moving on to the next stuff. But it was good soundtrack. So congrats to John Williams. I don't know the extent to which he's getting up in age enough to where you're like, all right, was this kind of like a career achievement award? Because they're worried that they won't be able to give him any more soon. Like how much of this is because of his age? I don't even remember seeing who else was nominated, but congrats to John Williams.
Yeah, he's still got it. But I will say, you're talking, you haven't listened to much. I remember how adamant that, we all needed to get up on Michael Giacchino's score for Rogue One. And after my like long, I would at least the way I thought it was kind of a passionate appeal for it. It's like, yeah, and after I did the show, I don't think I've listened to it once. So it's, that's the weird thing about music and stuff like that. You can get very like into it I think now, at least the way I enjoy music now is like, I enjoy it for very intense short periods, and then I kind of disengage. It's like, and I think that's kind of where I'm at with these new scores too. It's like, maybe I'll revisit them, maybe I won't, but it's like not a thing for having gone from like listening to like the Rogue One score about at least once a day for a couple weeks or whatever, and then being like noticing it on my phone and going like, oh yeah, I haven't heard that in a while. It's kind of funny. I guess it ties back into this whole kind of the idea that we have so much content coming at us. It's almost hard to kind of spend time with it the way, you, again, it's like when you're a kid and it's like something new comes out and it's like, you're not getting another thing for 3 years. It's kind of like a roast chicken. By the time right. You're in a den, you're like, you've got the carcass soaking, they got the bones soaking in the water trying to get soup out of it. But now it just feels like, hey, it's a fresh chicken every week. God, that is a ridiculous metaphor. I apologize. Did I tell people I'm getting over a cold? Because if you're wondering what's going on with Robert this week, I was very sick up until like 2 days ago, and I think I might still be sick.
I see.
So yeah, John Williams, he won a Grammy. Was he in? Do you know if he was in attendance? Did you watch the Grammys?
I did not.
Yeah,
I read about this.
I only watched a little bit of it, so I didn't see it. Anyway, well, congratulations to him. And so I guess another big casting thing was the announcement that Jimmy V will be playing R2-D2, or has played, because I assume it's been filmed already, R2-D2 in The Last Jedi, which...
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I thought they would wrap shooting at this point, but maybe he's going to play R2-D2 for whatever reshoots they have to do, and that's why...
Oh, I wonder if...
I don't know.
Have we heard talk of reshoots? Because they talk about... I mean, it was on another...
Not yet, but I mean, they must have to do some, I would think. I think they're editing it right now, and that may be where they figure out what they need to do, and so, in another month or so, we may hear about reshoots.
Because, I'd heard some rumors, and of course, it's on other podcasts, so, they get their information probably the same way we do, but the way they take it, and I honestly, sorry, I forget who it was that mentioned this, but they had heard rumors that, like, that the thing's almost locked. The movie, like, it's literally, they're just putting the special effects in. And, obviously the things that make changes and whatnot, and certain things that have happened probably have necessitated that they're going to have to make changes. But, I mean, if John Williams was already scoring so early...
Yeah, that's true.
It makes you wonder, but it also makes you wonder maybe his work ethic has changed, where it's like... Where, I think John Williams normally was like, hey, get it done as closest to done, and then I'll score it. So I don't have to write music for stuff that's not in the movie anymore.
Right.
Because it's like, it's like writing a song every time you do a thing. So if like, if a 5-minute sequence is cut out, why write music for it? But maybe he's more okay with like, well, I'll get the broad strokes, and if we need to edit it down, that's fine. It's like, but I want to get it done now. But that might be a scheduling issue with him. I know he's supposedly signed to do whenever they do this next Indiana Jones movie, if Harrison Ford doesn't end up flying himself into a mountain or something. You heard about that, right? Mm-hmm. So for people who don't,
yes,
Harrison had a minor issue with an mishap again, which, just as a quick aside, I've read this article. This is not like something new for him. I guess he's been in several plane crashes. Not necessarily his fault. I mean, they've been leaning heavily that he might have made an error in this, but I'm not in the NTSB or whatever. But a lot of stuff like helicopter crashes and bird strikes, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
He's a pilot, but I guess every pilot has, you just have those days where a bird flies into your engine, or you didn't pay super close attention to the air traffic controller. It happens, but
exactly.
Yeah, luckily he's okay. We don't have to worry about yet another Harrison Ford accident.
Dude needs to watch Sully.
I bet he did watch Sully.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think he watches movies that he's not in?
No,
Like,
I don't think he watches I don't think Harrison Ford watches
I was going to say,
movies.
do you think he watches the movies he's in? I don't think he does either. Which also ties back to John Williams. John Williams has said that he doesn't watch the movies that he writes the scores for, right? Because he watches a version of the movies, but then he doesn't go to the theater or rent the thing and sit down and watch the movie that he wrote the music for, because he knows what happens. He wrote the music for it.
Yeah,
so yeah, Harrison Ford, I would bet he does not watch movies that he's in. He probably used to watch movies that he's not in, but I bet he does less and less of that than he used to.
Well, I remember years ago, it was something about, I heard a story, and it was basically, I don't know the whole story, but it involved Harrison Ford in flying a private airplane with Jimmy Buffett and Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes. And I realized that guy lives a completely different life than I ever will.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're flying, it's like, oh, we're just going to fly out to Jimmy Buffett's island for the weekend, and Ed Bradley's going to, tell us about, I don't know, he's going to call up Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and he's coming out for the weekend or something. It's like, these guys kind of live a different life than I know. And I don't think that means hey guys, let's put Star Wars on and let's watch me. Yeah, I don't think Harrison Ford has ever seen a movie that he was in. Except for that really awful sci-fi movie he made 3 years ago.
Ender's Game?
Ender's Game. I think he's seen that. And he's like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah, at this point, if he goes to the movies, it's because his kids, want to see something.
Exactly. Oh, I guess we're going to be watching Zootopia again. Is this thing on DVD yet? Can I have this flown out to my house? Although I was watching one of these really corny David Blaine illusion specials on Netflix, and the whole point is him doing magic for Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford seemed almost childlike wonder when David Blaine did a weird card trick. So I don't know, man. I don't really know. Harrison Ford is one of these guys. He's an enigma to me. It's I kind of got I was talking before the show. It's I watched a couple weeks ago. I watched Bright Lights, the Carrie Fisher, Debbie Reynolds documentary, and I totally recommend it. With the caveat that at least I took away, it was a very bittersweet kind of thing to watch. Just
right, if you watch it after they're both,
especially that they're both gone. But even beforehand, it's there's a lot of examples of our own human frailty of as we get older and stuff, and it kind of makes you sad. But I honestly feel like that's between reading her books and seeing interviews with her, and then really getting to kind of see some of the, she obviously knew there was a camera on her, but at least getting a little window into the life of Carrie Fisher. It's it does make you kind of realize it's well, you don't necessarily know these people like you think you do, just because you've seen their movies and their interviews and you got their figures or whatever. And I guess in some ways that's good, because at least they get to keep something for themselves.
Right.
Again, why am I off in the weeds on this? But back to the Jimmy V thing, he's playing R2-D2. Well, who played R2? I heard rumor that R2-D2 had been played by a different actor in The Force Awakens, even though it was obviously a very brief. There wasn't a lot of movement of R2-D2, but I know that Kenny Baker was apparently kind of even a slightly less involved than Peter Mayhew was in The Force Awakens, and the idea, I think they were hired as consultants.
Yeah, physically, I can't imagine that Kenny Baker was really up for. Not that R2-D2 had a lot of scenes anyway.
Right.
So given the extent of what R2-D2 did in Episode 7, he might have been able to do it. But Yeah, I don't know. I can look that up real quick.
Might have been a different actor, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that I wonder. Again, we're talking about where Star Wars was when we started and thing. It's that idea. Okay, well, now we're comfortable with people being recast. Why are we?
I mean, it's
why are we?
Yeah, it's not really a thing where we'll have to worry about, at least with R2D2. I don't think like, oh, what's Jimmy V's take on the character going to be?
Yeah, because it's kind of it's
right.
It's set up with hopefully the interior of that costume is better than it was for Kenny. But it's a thing for a diminutive sized person being able to use the full motion of their body back and forth to kind of, I don't know. It makes me wonder.
And so much of it, it's driven now by, the radio controls are so much better. I'm sure they can rig it so that, the folks with the radio controls can do most of the head rotation and everything else. So it's not like with Han Solo, like, oh, we'll see someone else's take on this character. It's kind of like, well, they need someone to operate the few things within R2D2 and, like you said, kind of rock back and forth maybe. But that's not, I mean, and Jimmy V is not, I guess Kenny Baker, I don't remember what his credits were prior to Star Wars, but Jimmy V is he's not like a big name actor. He's played a goblin or various goblins in the Harry Potter movies. He's had several different parts in different iterations of Doctor Who. He played a character called Lofty in that Pan movie. And those are kind of his biggest credits. So I don't even know what auditions for like being R2D2 were like, honestly.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, here, get in this trash,
whatever,
get in this trash can and
the work that Kenny Baker did or whatever work he'll be doing. But I don't really know what they were looking for in an actor to fill this role.
Right. And I guess it's like you said, the technology is so good. I guess it's good a human being's getting paid to act in a movie and not being replaced with CGI. I guess that's always good, but it always makes me wonder. It's like, are they doing this to kind of, is this the real effects, real practical effects, real sets kind of attitude that they don't want to quite let go of, even though it's like, that was that's not really true. And to be perfectly honest, you don't want it to be true. It's like, you don't want people using, 1979 era effects in Rogue One for walkers. You don't want, it's that balance. It's like, how much will the brain take on before it calls BS on stuff, which, my recent awakening on the concept of the uncanny valley or whatever, it's I was all right. Like I said, one of my favorite parts of The Force Awakens was Chewbacca, and then to realize, like, people said, like, oh, Chewie doesn't look right, like the hairs thing. It's like, I never really thought that. I thought, okay, whatever. It's been 30 years. Chewie has a slightly different hairstyle. I feel like the guy, is he the Finnish actor or Swedish? I forget the guy's name, and sorry, but it's like I felt like he actually was able to give life to that character in a way that Peter wouldn't have been able to with his knees. And that's not a knock on Peter Mayhew. He originated the character. He's held the torch for the character in fan events, and he is Chewbacca in the same way that I will always think of him as Chewbacca, even though and even what Billy D said, kind of. I don't know. We don't think this was in the notes. Did we talk about the Lando lunch?
No, we didn't.
Just the idea. I think the big takeaway was that Billy D kind of said, like, well, I'll always be Lando, and I totally know what he's saying. It's like, dude, it's not James Bond. These characters are not like, oh, we'll just get somebody else and throw it in. That's not to say you can't make a great Star Wars film, but it's like you can never, Jimmy V. It's like, I don't know what the participation of R2D2 in is, but I don't know if we'll get to the point where Jimmy V will be like synonymous with R2 the way Kenny Baker is. Now, it might have helped that Kenny Baker, at least for my generation, he had a pretty large role in Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits. So I always remember him from that. So it's like I always had a face to put with the suit. But
yeah, and I'll jump in. So Jimmy V apparently had, and when we say Jimmy V, his last name, or at least his credited last name, is VEE. So it is V. Okay. He had an uncredited performance or uncredited role as R2D2 in The Force Awakens.
Okay,
so
this is
basically now he's just getting credit for it.
And it's fun.
Good for him. If he's doing the work, he should get paid for it like he is.
Well, hopefully he worked that out in his contract. But I will say this: the one thing, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a different. I am calling for a fully, robotic R2D2. There was that concept in the right after Star Wars came out where George Lucas tried to I don't really know how much effort he put into this, but it was kind of understood that they didn't talk about who was in the costumes.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously James Earl Jones famously declined credit. I think at the time thought maybe it was beneath him, which if his career at the time, he was, a rising star. So maybe it being in a sci-fi film was kind of what might have been a ding on his career.
He had been in Doctor Strangelove and
Great White Hope, yeah. So I mean, he'd already had a pretty good career, so I understand. It's like, yeah, he probably just wanted a check, but obviously he's embraced it greatly. But Anthony Daniels, I had lamented in the Skywalking book, the Dave Pollock's, the first biography of Lucas, that I'm still looking for. I got rid of my copy. I really shouldn't. I thought it's like that. That's like my favorite biography because I feel like it's the most kind of unfiltered. But anyway, I think Anthony Daniels had taken, some offense to the idea that he would go to events and even the making of Star Wars video that came out. It's like he's not. I don't think he's credited as Anthony Daniels, and so people had thought on some level that they had made robots that worked, and maybe somebody was talking. And Anthony Daniels was talking in was dubbed his voice in later or something. But maybe that's something that obviously you can't. I mean, obviously, people are more actually excited to have somebody inside the suit, I guess, than anything. It's kind of, whereas they, George had kind of pretend like, oh, let's just pretend they're robots. Now, Lucasfilm obviously I'm punching the mic, wants people to know, no, this is a real person in there. So I guess that's a good thing. I mean,
and maybe that is a legacy of Star Wars, that now there's this kind of audience expectation or audience demand that no, there's going to be a person in there, and we want to know who that person is, and we want it to be someone who's going to give that character personality that they wouldn't otherwise have. I mean, who knows if Chewbacca and if the droids hadn't been such huge characters from the original trilogy. Well, first of all, then Star Wars, probably wouldn't have been the phenomenon it was, but if George Lucas came back and made the prequels, who knows how many of those characters would have been just CGI, and rather than having someone in a rubber mask with animatronics, doing the mouth movement, I'm sure he would have been just fine. We'll just make it digital if that's what's cheaper.
Right.
Whatever.
And people would have if people hadn't made a thing about the fact that they loved Peter and they loved Anthony Daniels and they loved, Kenny Baker. Yeah, you could have just the even idea that it's kind of interesting if you think about it that, all the problems that apparently Lucasfilm had with David Prowse over the years, they used him. Even into Jedi, after he, famously spilled the beans, 6 months before the movie was released. It was just that situation where nobody actually believed him or something. I don't know. Right. Or there's no internet to spread around these rumors that, people already kind of knew that Darth Vader cuts off Luke's hand and was his father and whatnot. But they still worked with him. So obviously on some level, it's like the fact that he could have had any tall person. It's like the
right.
that they actually try to have a consistency. I mean, there's something to be said for that. Do we want to, since we're talking actors, do we want to bring the Han Solo movie casting stuff up to this?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do that.
All right. Well, we have a casting rumor. Well, I guess at this point, I think it's pretty safe to say that whenever we hear like, oh, such and so is, possibly in line for a role in the movie, like that means they are, right? Given the history with Donald Glover and with Woody Harrelson. So basically, we have two rumors. First is that Thandie Newton is in talks to join the Han Solo movie. Thandie Newton is currently in Westworld. She's done a ton of movies. There's no word on who her character would be. It's just that Thandie Newton is in talks to join the Han Solo movie. And then we have an actress named Phoebe Waller-Bridge is going to, and this we know she's going to specifically play a CG character. So Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I have not heard of her. Apparently she plays the title character on something called Fleabag, which is either on British TV or Amazon or something. Yeah. And she has various other British film and TV credits. Now her character, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the CG character, it is, quote, a significant part of the ensemble, similar to key Star Wars characters in the past, like Chewbacca, C-3PO, and most recently, Alan Tudyk's K-2SO in Rogue One. So as soon as that happened, everyone was speculating, oh, she's going to play a droid. And then you had this kind of, like, oh, she's going to be the first female droid in Star Wars. And then people had to be like, well, no, there have been female droids in Star Wars before. Oh, she's playing the first significant female droid. Right.
Take that, TC-14.
Yeah, EV-99.
Yeah. Wait, which was EV-99?
Telling me that EV-99 isn't
Which one's
EV-99? That was the droid in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi that was voiced by Richard Marquand, actually.
Wait, that was a woman? That was
Isn't
a woman,
it?
Lady droid?
I just assumed with the name EV-99. And I think in that book of, Tales from Jabba's Palace, I think that story, one of the stories in there might have gendered EV-99 as female.
Yes. Wikipedia says that is Eve. I guess I'd never obviously, what do they call that? I just assumed, made a bad assumption.
Yeah. That was when I heard, it was the first female droid. That one immediately went to my, I was like, no, there was one in Return of the Jedi. And then
it was a torturer too. It liked to torture other droids.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was a she didn't have any, there weren't any lines, but there was a female looking droid in The Force Awakens, even at Maz's castle.
And there was a droid in Dexter's Diner.
That's right.
So what are they talking about? I mean, I understand.
Well, so that's why they're saying for significant female.
Yeah, droid. I mean, I guess that's
one who's going to be like part of the ensemble.
I guess I sound like that basically every time someone complains about, like, why aren't there good roles for women, and then I go, yeah, what about Sigourney Weaver in Alien? That was like 40 years ago, dude. It's like, oh, never mind. But yeah.
That is true. We haven't had really a female droid with at least one speaking line
with some agency. I understand what they're saying, and it's like, I feel like that this is a prime, the one good or bad. I can't imagine why it would necessarily be bad, but one of the good things about Alan Tudyk's bow, as they call it, is K-2SO in Rogue One. It's like, he kind of like showed like, hey, there is like, this is something that people like. I mean, there wasn't a lot.
There's more than one way to play a droid.
Right. Exactly. Well,
we can have droids with all kinds of different personalities.
Yeah,
they don't just have to be, Abbott and Costello. Basically.
Exactly. It's K-2SO kind of encompassed the both. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say like, oh, it's like R2-D2 and C-3PO in one droid. I think Alan kind of did something different, and I liked what they did with it. And if it's just one of these situations where they just she's cast because she does comedy. And again, I haven't seen Fleabag. The only thing that I saw on on Phoebe Waller-Bridge's IMDb I'd seen was the Glenn Close movie Albert Nobbs, which is actually a really good movie, but I don't remember her in it. So I kind of get the feeling just from seeing photos that she maybe does some kind of has done some comedic roles in the past, just because the clips look like, I don't know. So
yeah, I mean, the fact that Chewbacca, I mean, everyone's kind of jumping to assume that she'll play a droid because of Alan Tudyk, but the fact that Chewbacca is also listed there, like, there's part of me that's like, maybe she's playing an alien. Like, maybe this is a Maz Kanata situation, right? Not every or a Snoke situation, right? Not every CG character has to be a droid. There are other things they can do, and the fact that they listed Chewbacca and like, well, maybe it's like a alien with weird, proportions to their body that, or a crazy face, or a mouth that doesn't really exist. It just emits sound. There are lots of things they could do with CG. The fact that they listed C-3PO and K-2SO, and enough people are saying that it'll be a droid that, okay, maybe there's some other information floating around out there to make people think that, but there's part of me that's like, well, maybe it'll be just another alien character. So,
yeah, and
we'll see. And
to be perfectly, now that I think about it, and I have to keep reminding myself that when I think about these movies that I'm jumping timelines, that the Han Solo movie is obviously going to be, they think is going to be like 10 to 15 years before A New Hope, so it's like just post Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith kind of. So there's going to be a litany of characters from that era that they're going to probably maybe want to touch on, Nemoidians, or, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be anything, but it would be, if it wasn't.
Did we ever see any female Nemoidians?
Yeah, I never know, because they never kind of.
I don't think we did.
At least not in the trade federations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the person that
not
was
canonically,
the person that was sewn, like, they had that weird cyborg looking thing from Phantom Menace, where their face is like almost sewn into the screen. I think that kind of had a female voice, but who knows? It's like, I mean, now that I feel like now it's people actually want to know this stuff more, explicitly now. I think it's important to people, and they want to say it. Whereas in the past, I feel like again, it's like that the EV droid, and me, having seen that movie 1,000 times, it never occurred to me that it was a female droid. But I mean, I understand where people are coming from. It's just, it could be an alien, it could be anything. It's like, they've gotten so good now. They're they're replicating human beings. So it's like we can kind of I mean, I know sometimes they, like when it was costumes, they'd have to cast to a physical type. So it's like. Right. Well, that's not. Yeah, so now it's like, Lama Sue in Attack of the Clones was a New Zealand actress who didn't look anything like who she was playing because of CGI, and she had to walk around with a hat on that looked like this Camino cloner face or whatever.
Right, so that everyone they could get the eye lines right. Yeah. So
it having being tall or in lanky or whatever isn't necessarily, because even Alan Tudyk had to wear like 2 foot stilts when he was acting, and it's like, so technology's so great. Just her physical appearance probably isn't even a clue as what she's going to be playing,
Right.
Thandie
so are you watching Westworld?
Yeah,
I'm not watching Westworld.
I watched the entire first season of Westworld, and it's it's interesting. It's we could I think I made a joke. We're the only Westworld podcast on iTunes currently a couple weeks ago, but months ago. But I like Thandie Newton. She's really, I don't know. She's good. She's a good actress. I don't know if her character she plays on that was necessarily my favorite, but it's hard to talk about it without giving away anything. And I won't, but I will say, she seems comfortable kind of playing with fantastical types of movies. Sometimes when people get into genre films, it's like they kind of just go, ugh. And she actually worked with Judi Dench in the ambitious Vin Diesel vehicle, The Chronicles of Riddick. She was a baddie along with Carl Urban, and she had a lot of good scenes where she was just kind of, chewing the scenery, and she played like this, she was royalty in this kind of weird, for people who haven't seen the movie, it's like this weird cult of like death cult kind of group where they just show up on planets and they either join their army or you get killed or something. And she plays a very like conniving, almost like a Game of Thrones kind of, she's she's trying to get, she's unhappy with her place in this little group in the movie, and she's trying to get Carl Urban to kind of jump ahead in the line of succession. And so she's really good in it, actually, which, that's not
she has a pretty, Oh, go ahead.
No, she has a good range about this, and I think she's able to have fun. I don't know obviously what her character would be, but I think it's a thing where it's like, yeah, she's not going to be like showing up and having where people are going like, oh boy, this person doesn't really.
I'm just doing this to make money,
right?
I can go back to doing my small independent things. I mean, her filmography is pretty varied. So, she's done genre films. She was in Interview with the Vampire. She was in Mission Impossible 2, which I think is the first movie I ever saw her in. She did 2012 or 2012, that Roland Emmerich disaster movie, right? So she's done these kind of big, tentpole action effects movies. She's done comedy. She was in Run, Fat Boy, Run. She was in Norbit. I don't know if you would consider that a comedy. I guess. I guess technically that's what it was meant to be. She's done drama film. She was in Four Colored Girls. She was in Pursuit of Happiness. She had a run, or I guess she was just a voice apparently on ER, or she was on ER for a little bit. So she's done a lot of. She was in Crash, which is unfortunate. She was in. She played the title character in Beloved from the late 90s, right? So she's done a bunch of different things. She's done some comedy. She's done some kind of serious emotional drama. She's done these kind of big action movies. So I mean, I think she sounds like an actress who's kind of up for whatever, and that's not really necessarily a clue to what her character might be, because she's done so many different things. But the fact that she has that experience working, some action, some comedy, some drama, I think that versatility is probably an asset in the Han Solo movie, I would guess.
So yeah, and I'm definitely more excited about Thandie Newton than Emilia Clarke. It's just kind of, she's definitely a better actress. So I'm just going to add a left field on this, because I forgot to add it to the thing. Have you heard this thing where Rosario Dawson is talking how she wants to play Ahsoka Tano in a movie?
Yeah, and I don't know if she was like asked directly about like, oh, what Star Wars character would you like to play? And she said Ahsoka, or if she like put the word out there like, hey, if anyone is interested in doing a live action Ahsoka Tano movie, call me up. I'm not sure which it was.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess that would mean that she survived. I guess I don't know if she means to play her like circa Star Wars Rebels, or if that would mean they would have to make her survive the duel with Vader. I don't know.
That's the kind of unless they were if they were doing anything before then I don't understand why they wouldn't at least use Ashley Eckstein's voice for consistency. But right. Yeah, I mean, my personal feeling is that Ahsoka Tano's dead, but yeah, it's like, I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things where it's kind of like an actor will just throw it out there because it's like, hey, you can't get hired if you don't tell people you want to be in it. I don't necessarily wouldn't be that excited about that, only because I'm not excited about that character. Kind of, I don't really.
I just think they've
want
done
them bridging the gap.
Character.
I don't really want to bring. I don't want Ezra and Kanan and Hera. I don't necessarily want them in the movies. I kind of like that they are kind of like they kind of control their own domain of that TV cartoon thing.
They kind of occupy their own space within
the
Star Wars galaxy.
It's like, and even with the experiments, I mean, it's fun that they brought Saw Gerrera in from the Clone Wars, and like I said, I enjoyed Forrest Whitaker's take on a character that actually really wasn't particularly fleshed out in my own mind, because I wasn't a huge fan of that part of the Clone Wars. But even so, when they tried to dovetail it back in by bringing him to do a voice on Rebels, it was like, it didn't really add anything. I didn't feel like I understood. It's like, okay, that's fun, but it's not really needed. In the future, they don't need to necessarily keep cross-pollinating. But, hey, if she does some screen test and they think she's great for something they've got going, then more power to her. I'm not, she was in Clerks 2. It's like, I haven't really got to see a chance for her to really act, so I don't really know.
Right.
But I just kind of wanted to bring it up because it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, people go like, oh yeah, whatever. Every actor in Hollywood is throwing out that they want to be in Star Wars. But, Samuel L. Jackson turned a suggestion that he wanted to be in Star Wars into a 3-movie deal. So it's not, it's not without precedent.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess she would be fine. It would, yeah. And my being lukewarm on the idea, I think, is similar to you, where it's more about, like, I think they've done everything they can do with that character.
Just not a lot of meat left.
I don't know what other stories they would have to tell about her that would be all that interesting. So it's like, yeah, thanks. That maybe would have been nice to make known 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But,
I've already seen the CG, like the Photoshops and stuff, and it's like, I understand. We all have our opinions. I'm kind of just hoping Ashley's going to come back as a ghost in another episode, Rebels stuff, because I've never been particularly happy with how they deal with the Force Ghost stuff anyway, so it'd be a nice opportunity. Yeah. Anyway, but, where are we here? We talk about the teaser reel. We did.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, taking stock of where we are, and I referenced, like, we might come back to some of this later. So Lucasfilm today announced that there's going to be a panel at Celebration in just a couple months with Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson talking about The Last Jedi. That's all they said, but to me, that equals, like, we're definitely going to see something from this movie, whether that's a teaser or a full-on trailer, whether that's one of those kind of behind-the-scenes things where, real sets, practical effects, and everyone talks about how much they love working on Star Wars and how it's special to be there, and because it's episode 8, the people coming, John Boyega can talk about coming back to that character, and he loves being there, and they all get to kind of pay their own tribute to Carrie Fisher, and whether it's that kind of, and we get maybe a couple of creature designs that we get to see, and maybe one set, that's what I would guess it would be, but it might be a full-on teaser. I mean, they've done that before too. So, I mean, that, and we had talked about this around the time of the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago, and how people were expecting or hoping that they would show something during the Super Bowl, and you and I both were like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen, because they jack up the ad prices during the Super Bowl, but also because they're going to want to control. They're going to want to have the attention just beyond that Star Wars movie, and having Celebration just a couple months out, they get to let kind of anticipation build and slowly announce what the panels are going to be and who's going to show up, and help build anticipation. And that way, when they get to Celebration, it's this whole weekend of people talking about nothing but Star Wars. You get multiple news announcements coming out about different movies, whether they announce the next standalone movie after Han Solo or the next couple. That, I think, is a big question to me. But, I think Celebration is definitely where they're going to want to debut a lot of that stuff about The Last Jedi. And so I think that means that's like a couple months away, and everyone has to kind of like sit tight. But I would expect that that's where we get to see a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the way that's the way you kind of brand celebration in
Mm-hmm.
the idea that, hey, you're getting value because you come here and you're going to be the first. And it's like, yeah,
Right.
showing Star Wars clip at the Super Bowl. It's like, have they ever debuted anything at a major sporting event? It's kind
I
of,
guess the Olympics, the reason people were saying, oh, maybe the Super Bowl is because didn't they show a teaser or something during the Olympics last year?
oh, maybe. Oh,
But I mean, the Olympics is
yes,
also
they
that's
did.
like a
There was
global.
some tease. Now that you mentioned that, I'm thinking.
I mean, the Olympics is also a global event in the way that the Super Bowl still isn't really. I mean, people all over the world try to watch the Super Bowl, but that's not the same as the Olympics.
Right.
So,
well,
yeah,
yeah,
I
and
think
it's like, and I think
they'll make exceptions for the Olympics.
and what did they say? It wasn't this year, supposedly. I mean, I'm no football guy. I probably watched the last 20 minutes of the Super Bowl, and I would say that, like,
that was the most exciting part.
yeah, exactly. I would say that as far as like the little bits and bobs I'd seen of what, like, they were promoting Hugh Jackman Wolverine's Logan.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Logan. It's like,
Right.
I felt like, wow, that was not, that is not the kind of like 30-second little thing is perfect for something like what they're trying to do with Logan. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, the context of, like, let's have Star Wars be featured in this thing where you could have anything from, a performance which, might have been, they didn't know at the time, like, oh, it might have been really politically charged or something, and it would have completely usurped any conversation about Star Wars.
Right.
It could have, even the ending of the game itself would have out
Right.
thing. So why even take the risk when you have, like, if you can just wait, and you've got basically every nerd that has money is going to be in Florida, and, like, nerds that are cheap like me are going to be on YouTube.
And people are going to be tweeting about it constantly, and I mean that's the other point that you kind of allude to, is that because they're a Disney company now, they're either not going to want to, or they're going to be told not to step on any of the Marvel movies coming out, right? Either, when I saw Rogue One, there were several different trailers, but two of those trailers were always Logan, the new Wolverine movie, and Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Both of which come out before,
Right.
episode 8. So they're going to want to make sure that they put as much advertising out there as they can for those movies, to promote those movies, to get people interested in those, before they step all over it with Star Wars.
I will say this: Logan is a Fox production, and it's not I don't think it's a Marvel studio. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which is a weird thing, because Marvel.
I know that there's that weirdness. Go ahead.
They have that contentious thing where they actually they pulled. Fox did the Fantastic Four thing that Josh Trank, famously kind of blew at the last minute in his online talking about it. Marvel had almost actively worked against that movie. The fact that they canceled the Fantastic Four like a year before the movie came out to kind of hamstring it. So yeah, but I understand what you're saying. The Guardians of the Galaxy, which is probably more appropriate in the fact that it is it's right in the wheelhouse. I mean, if you like Star Wars, you're probably going to like Guardians of the Galaxy, because it's kind of like its jokier, more silly cousin. It's kind of,
which I still have not seen.
Oh, really?
Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah,
it's fun. After all this time, it may have been built into something more than you're gonna get when you watch it. But
that's kind of what I'm wondering.
I enjoyed it. I'm not the world's huge Chris Pratt fan. I think he's a little overexposed, but I think he did a good job, and definitely, it's fun. Take the time, watch it.
All right.
All right. But yeah, there'll be the teaser thing. Like, again, a couple weeks ago, I'm saying, like, Adam Driver says, I'd love it if we didn't even do a trailer. and I'm sitting there agreeing with them, like that would be so. And then of course the idea that they might not do a teaser at the celebration, now I'm pissed about it. So obviously I'm not consistent on this. I'm kind of like, I want to see some footage because I'm greedy.
Yeah.
And behind the scenes, the real practical effects, Mark Hamill drinking a cup of soup, under an umbrella in Dubrovnik isn't necessarily what I'm hungering for. You know what I mean?
Here we go, back again.
He's sitting there eating his cup of soup like, oh boy, this is good soup. I love being here doing episode 8. We're using real effects. I'm back. I get to say something this time. It's like, I mean, that will be exciting, but it's never as exciting as the characters, the music, the artistry of giving people what they want, but not giving them so much as to spoil anything. I mean, that's the quintessential experience. So again, if they're just going to show people driving to set and stuff like that, it's kind of like, I would feel a little ripped off if I went to Florida, but I'm not going to Florida. So
yeah, I guess. Sorry. It's this weird point too where I go back and forth myself of like, how much do I want to know about this movie beforehand, and how much do I want to go in fresh? And I'm sure come Celebration, I'll be watching or trying to watch all of those different panels about behind the scenes, or how they did I guess at that point they probably won't do much about The Last Jedi, but I'm sure I'll probably be trying to find out as much as I can then. But just like you said, hearing about it in the abstract, you're kind of like, yeah, that's fine. If they don't do a trailer, great. That way I go in fresh and I don't have anything ruined for me. But then when you start talking about it, the reality of it, you're like, I want to see something.
Well, yeah, and I
want to get a hint.
I've already kind of and I sent this to you and you declined to read it, which somebody had put up a synopsis, supposedly a leaked synopsis of this teaser, that they claim that there is a teaser in existence. But again, I only read about half the synopsis because it was like, well, if it really is, I don't want to be completely spoiled. But there was nothing indicative of the synopsis I read that made me think for sure this is what I'm looking at it, because there'd been a lot of talk about like what the first teaser of The Force Awakens was going to be, and it was going to be like Luke's hand floating. But then again, now I've heard rumor that they actually had filmed that, and they just decided early in production that they weren't going to go on that. They weren't going to exploit that Luke's hand thing, the imagery, because it had gotten on some movie site had talked about it like a year ahead of time. So it's like, I don't know what it is. I mean, I could be right. It wasn't anything earth shattering. The only thing I'll say, it's like, one character is that we hadn't seen in the real, it was only via hologram. We get to see what they look like. That was the big thing people took away from it. But who knows? Yeah. It might be, it might be that they show the behind the scenes, and then Kathy Kennedy does the proverbial Steve Jobs one more thing as she leaves, and then they drop a 90-second teaser that blows people's mind. Which when you have that compressed timeline of being able to get people hyped up about something, double dutying, having like the behind the scenes the same weekend as the teaser might make sense. Although it might cannibalize the excitement a little bit. But maybe with 10 months away, maybe they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to worry about it. They're going to have so many toys in September and all this. They'll probably have hopefully they'll have some kind of comic run up to it, because God forbid we have an inter-movie comic. It's like, I mean, I know it supposedly takes place right after the end of The Force Awakens, but
I mean, we've talked about this, and I've speculated that I wonder if that's what the Poe Dameron comic secretly is.
I see.
And like by the because based on I don't know. Just wondering if maybe in episode 8 we're actually going to see Agent Terex, and if they're going to spend more time with Black Squadron. If all of the time they're spending with this one character we've never heard of before, maybe Terex is the next Aphra, and we're probably not going to see Aphra in a movie or anything. That's possible too, but it's all I think I speculated at one point that maybe we will get to see Terex, or at least hear about Terex at some point. And so this Poe Dameron comic is even though it's technically a prequel to episode 7, some of the things that show up in the comic might make their way into episode 8 and 9.
Right.
I guess we'll find out.
Exactly. Maybe we'll find out in the am I jumping ahead? The new crossover.
You're jumping ahead. Do you want to talk about the one rumor about The Last Jedi? About just one location, or do you?
I think that's fine.
Okay. Well, so there is one rumor that at least I felt comfortable reading about without feeling like too much was being spoiled. But if you are someone who, wants to go in completely fresh to The Last Jedi, then maybe
jump ahead.
Go do the dishes for 5 minutes or so. So basically, there's rumor one of the new planets that we're going to see in The Last Jedi is going to be, quote, Mars, but with snow. So basically, Mars in the sense of being like a red planet, reddish atmosphere, but with snow on the ground. They also, this person who passed along this rumor, described something like a hallway-sized trench. The interiors are not unlike Starkiller Base in the sense that you can see that kind of Death Star Imperial style technology and architecture blending in with the natural environment and the rocks around it. So that's the rumor of the new planet. Before we talk about it, whenever I see someone write or use the words "not unlike," I think of the Saturday Night Live sketch, the George F. Will Sports Machine, which is this is going to be off topic.
That's fine,
but there is a local DC sports anchor, like a local news sports anchor named George Michael,
right?
And then he had this thing called the Sports Machine.
Oh yeah,
and it was basically just like early version of someone showing clips of sporting events from around the country, right? Or you'd pull the lever on the Sports Machine or whatever, and then they would show clips from baseball games in Milwaukee or something. So that became like a national show, just George Michael's Sports Machine, of him showing clips and getting excited talking about them. So then George F. Will is a conservative newspaper columnist, but who loves baseball. Like he's written a book about baseball or something. I don't know. And he wears these like thick glasses, and he has a bow tie. He's very kind of stuffy persona. He shows up on Sunday talk shows sometimes, or as a panelist. So I want to say, I can't remember if it was Bob Odenkirk who wrote it or Robert Smigel in the 90s wrote this sketch called the George F. Will Sports Machine. And it was Corbin Burnson was the host that week, right? And of course, Corbin Burnson did a baseball movie, so he played a baseball player, and then John Lovitz played a baseball manager, and then Dana Carvey played this columnist George F. Will, and it was like a game show where he would hit the button on the Sports Machine, and then it would come up with a question, but it was all these like weird, stuffy, like esoteric philosophical questions about baseball that these actual baseball people like had no idea what he was talking about, and so. There's some question. I don't even remember all of it, but Dana Carvey, George F. Will is reading this question. He's like something. The line between the infield and the outfield. What is it not unlike? And like that's the question that they like in this game show that this manager. This baseball player is supposed to like, what is it not unlike? And so whenever I see someone write not unlike, I just hear Dana Carvey as George F. Will in my head saying like, what is it not unlike?
Yeah,
that was a long way to go.
No, I get where you're coming from.
Everyone's indulgence right there.
Well, it's because at least in the Pacific Northwest, the George Michael Sports Machine was kind of the bookend of the Sunday of like the boring, wet Sunday where it's like you wake up, and you turn on the TV and it's talking heads talking about politics, and at least when I was a teenager, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm not watching this.
Right.
And then when
it was what they showed right before they showed MASH,
exactly.
Basically.
And then George Michael would be on at 11:30, and you'd be like, what? George, the guy from Wham has a sports show? The first time you'd watch it, and you'd be like, no. It's like, but yeah, I get what you're putting down.
Yeah,
it's our show. We
picking up what I put down. So anyway, Mars, but with snow. What do you think, Robert?
I mean, it's like, why? I mean, how many different environments?
Yeah,
are going to be like these
like at
desert.
a certain point, they're going to run out of ideas.
Is it like
plants,
is it just like some kind of weird wheel with two arrows on it, and you spin the thing, and it's like snow, red rock, or water and jungle, and it's just like, oh, this is how we get these places. And it's like, I understand they have a commitment now where they kind of realize that one of the mistakes of the prequels, as far as creating memorable shots, is that the prequels definitely over relied on CGI backgrounds. So it's like, now they want to go, hey, what places can we go to make it a little bit more, look a little bit more real? So you go to the Maldives, or you go to,
right. We'll go to Iceland, but then we'll put digital planetary rings in the sky to make it look like we're not in Iceland.
Right. And, they've gone to North Africa, obviously, many times for Tatooine, but I mean, I don't know where they were filming this. I mean, now I go and say, like, oh, they've got to find these real sets, but where would they have gone? I mean, there was some rumor going around that there had been Star Wars filming going on in Eastern Washington. Now,
really?
Absolutely no evidence to back this up, and the person that told me was very suspicious themselves. So I won't even. But there was a rumor going around that they had done, that there had been some filming done there. But now you're saying it's like there are all kinds of geological things in Eastern Washington, and there's like craters of the moon, which is a heavily volcanic rocked area. It's like a national park. I think it's a state. I think it's national. I don't think it's a state park. Where I guess at one point, some astronauts they'd use the environment to maybe test like some of the buggies and stuff like that because of the hard rock, and they wanted to be able to see if they could circumnavigate these. I guess circumnavigate's a nautical term, but they want to be able to get over these rocks. So I mean, it makes you wonder. I mean, but it's maybe it's one of those things where they shoot plates and stuff like that with a crew, and then they just superimpose it with a set in England, or like they very famously did certain exterior sequences for Yavin 4 in A New Hope were filmed outside of ruins in Guatemala, but I don't think any of the principals ever traveled to Guatemala. So it's it's funny that I bring that. It's like I have no, other than this guy saying that he was like, yeah, I heard somebody said they're filming out there and for Star Wars, but it could be complete bunk. And even this guy kind of thought it was bunk too. But that area, Eastern Washington, would be perfect because there are huge, like, I don't even know what, I don't know. I wish my brother was here. I'd ask, he knows all the geological terms, but there's huge, like, ice flows, from glacial melts in, I don't know, prehistoric times or whatever. So there's these huge pieces of earth that have been kind of cut out of the ground, and I forget that they call it. Somebody was talking about them recently, but it would be perfect for some kind of Star Wars exterior plates or whatever. So, I mean, maybe I'm putting two and two together here out of nothing, but maybe this is maybe that's where that comes from. Hopefully they're not redoing, doing Starkiller Base again, where they're going to make that.
That's when I heard trench. I was like, ugh, another trench.
Yeah, I mean that's the if the whole plot. I mean, there's a whole. I don't want to talk about it because now I was about ready to just do a spoiler because I've read more spoilers than I really even. What happens? I read a spoiler and then I kind of like immediately go and do something else so it doesn't like lock in my head. But then later I start talking and I go, oh well, there's this thing where I heard that John Boyega would be doing X. And I'm like, ugh. Oh, it sticks more in my head now than I think it does. But
yeah, well, and. A long time ago, we made a joke, or I made a joke, I think, about how they were just going to keep filming on different UNESCO World Heritage sites,
right,
and like eventually just make their way to. But then I found, like a month or so ago, I think they was suggested that actually no, they are gonna the Han Solo movie or something is looking at a World Heritage site, in the desert here in the U.S. So it was like, really, we're just going to keep going to, right? Boba Fett's going to live at Monticello, where they're going to go to like, what's that? The Philadelphia Freedom Hall, and just film there, but like dress people in elaborate hats and alien costumes, so it doesn't look like they're in Philadelphia. Like at a certain point, they're going to run out of.
It's just going to be like the leftover sets from HBO's John Adams.
Right.
Boba Fett over here thinks he's Mr. Smarty Bouncy Hunter. But it makes you wonder. It's like, well, technology is getting better. You can, they can do things, but then they know people want the practical effects and the real sets and the.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I feel like aside from Dubrovnik and when they built kind of that extension of Skellig Michael on location, I think it was actually in England. I don't think it was I don't think they did they found another part in the northwestern coast of Ireland that they said, actually, it's very similar to Skellig Michael. It's not on an island. It's just it's an archipelago or whatever, peninsula. I don't know the difference, but
isthmus.
But it's interesting because it's kind of like, how much of this is them filming huge things, and how much things are they just collecting data for their CGI? I mean, it's like, especially with the First Order, because they're going to have a huge army, and it's like, that sequence that the kind of I don't know what Hux's little speech before the thing. It's like, well, come on. There's how many people? Where did they film that? Did they film that in a parking lot on a piece of white cloth that they put in later?
Right.
It's.
Right. Was Donald Gleason was just kind of shouting with no one there, and then they put in the big crowd later.
And they put the tears in later, and
yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of hard because it's like it makes you wonder. It's like, well, how much of like say stuff that was filmed in Abu Dhabi? It's like how much of like was all of the Jakku stuff, was that all Abu Dhabi, or did they go out and cheat a little bit? Or it's a much different experience that like Empire. It's like, well, we did it all the exteriors in Norway and all the interiors in England, and so I mean they have a lot more freedom now, so
well, and I mean, I do wonder if we are going to get to the point where some of those CG environments where they can be a little more fantastical, if those will become cheaper and they'll look better. And so they might go back to exploring using those, which I actually, that's one thing I would be in favor of, just for the reasons that we've been saying, that it would allow them a little more creativity, a little more freedom in designing these environments. And that would mean more green screen acting, which is not ideal. It's still, I think the technology is getting to the point where, they can use the VR stuff to kind of help the actors with that, and so that their green screen acting, maybe they have a better sense of what it would look like and where objects are, so that they're not just sitting on like a green square, a green cube, and like that's supposed to be a cockpit. That they have a better spatial sense of how they're supposed to be acting. So, at a certain point, again, like we've been saying, I think they're going to run out of real sets or at least real locations that they can use.
Yeah, I mean,
again, right? Because also, how many desert planets can you do? How many how many forest planets can you do? Things like that.
Well, and also, Rogue One has really shown us that they can, the whole I forget the name of the place that Cassian he kills the informant. Where that's called. I mean, like, obviously that's a lot of that is CGI. It's a big crowd scene, and then in Jeddah City, which I think was a set, it's kind of like that thing where it's like, well, they've gotten so good now, you can mix and mash. It's kind of funny because it's like one of the problems with the original trilogy is that everything kind of looks underpopulated, and you can always go, well, that's because they're rebels and they can only be among other rebels because they're on the run. But then it's like, well, Cloud City, there's, except for when they're running out, when all hell breaks loose and Lando gives everybody the order to disperse or whatever. That's the only time you really ever think you're in a full city. It's like, wow, there's a lot of people, and that guy Wilrow Hood, I think his name is, with the ice cream maker and that kind of stuff. It's like they're always, and the nice thing about CGI is you can make, one thing I said about Rogue One is that like they actually, like Jeddah City, and again, I don't remember the play where Cassian was. Like that was like those some of the first backgrounds that ever approached, like, oh, this is kind of what Star Wars looks like in my head. You know what I mean? It's like it's the like if I'm reading a book and somebody is, walking around Coruscant or whatever, or they're walking in the lower ends, it looks kind of like this. This is how many people I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot more aliens, whereas I feel like the original trilogy was underpopulated, and George had a real problem using the CGI, being able to integrate the CGI into the population in the prequels. It's like that everything kind of looks fake or whatever. So I don't know. Boy, we are off in the weeds on this, but
well,
it's 75, man.
Regardless,
episode 75. Cut me some slack.
So let's get back to stuff that we know is happening. So the comics. Let's talk about the comics. So there's an announcement, I guess late last week, following the previous comics crossover that they did. I guess I don't know if the Space Prison counts because Aphra was in that. That wasn't really built. Rebel Jail, I guess, is the official name of it. That wasn't really billed as a crossover, but Aphra was in the Star Wars title.
Exactly.
But anyway, so there, before that was the Vader Down crossover, and so they've just announced that there's going to be a new crossover event called Screaming Citadel.
Screaming Citadel!
Are you ready to rock?
Can I just say one thing about the name before we go on?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, obviously, I'm doing the mid-'80s metal, but it's like, it honestly sounds like, in the 80s when metal bands wanted to, like, they went in two directions. When they either all of a sudden started becoming a blues band, like Rat and Cinderella, all of a sudden they're like, we're a blues band. And then there was also the guys that decided that they were the artists and that they were going to do a concept album. So that'd be like Wasp had an album that was called like Headless Children or something like that. And to me, Screaming Citadel sounds like some kind of high concept record from a band like,
we're a metal band, but people are buying more prog records now.
Exactly.
So maybe we should do that.
It's like the Operation Mindcrime or the Headless Children of comics crossovers.
Oh man. You could see a Star Wars comic event called Operation Mindcrime. I feel like that may have been more like a Darth Vader thing with Silo and everyone. But anyway, Luke Skywalker and Dr. Aphra are going to team up to investigate a castle. And this wasn't part of the announcement, but from reading Aphra, for those of you who have been reading it, those of you who have not, in Aphra number 2, where we, start spending more time with Aphra's father, her father is looking for a place called the Citadel of Garn, hoping that it would, and this is, I'm quoting him from the comic, would precipitate a spiritual renaissance, an awakening of the Force for all. So I don't know if that is the titular Citadel of Screaming Citadel, but I would guess it might be. There's going to be a one-shot issue, a Screaming Citadel number 1. Then the story is going to pick up in Star Wars issue 31, Aphra issue 7, Star Wars issue 32, and then Aphra issue 8. So there are going to be 5 issues in total for this crossover event. The writers of Dr. Aphra and Star Wars, respectively, Kieran Gillen and Jason Aaron, have been working on it together. But Jason Aaron says that it will come out more of what Gillen is setting up in the Dr. Aphra comic, which is why I think it might be tied to that Citadel of Garn. So what is it? It's going to be a, quote, gothic horror story that will involve a sinister alien queen and symbiotes.
Sorry.
Robert, do you have something to share?
No,
go. I mean,
like,
if you
come on, really? They're gonna cross the. I mean, the truth is, obviously, first brings the Alien series, which people might think, oh, that's so great because it's around the same time we're dealing with Luke at that between New Hope and Empire, and that's around Ridley Scott's Alien came out. But then it's also there was a whole run in the X-Men. In the Shi'ar War, something in the 80s, where it was something to do with alien queens and symbiotes. It's just such a, I don't know. I mean, I'm already so, cynical is probably the best word. I'm already suspicious of any crossover because, I mean, it's hard not to be cynical about crossovers in comics when, you read the history of Marvel and you find out that they invented the crossover as a way to kind of make more money and to be able to basically force people to buy titles that aren't selling as well as they'd hoped.
Right.
And so when they do that and then they throw in a alien queen symbiote and, and like so-and-so is going to show up, it's like, you just wonder if, like, is this story is this storytelling or marketing we're seeing here, Right. And I guess I'm gonna read it because it's like I feel a responsibility to read it to review it on the show, but it's like part of me is kind of like, oh, come on, really? Why don't we just do like a really good Aphra, which I think she's on her way for it to be a really good standalone comic, but it also raises weird questions. Like, yes, you brought up the fact they've already worked together, and I completely forgot it. So obviously it wasn't super memorable, but but they've already met, and also now she knows something that Luke doesn't. One, that who his daddy is. And that's going to be a big thing that they're not going to be able to touch, especially if they work together. It's like, cause I think she explicitly says to Vader, it's like, I'm not going to say anything about this Luke guy being your son or whatever. And and they're not really adhering to this idea that she's kind of on the run or hiding out from Vader. And it's like, oh, we're going to bring them again. But I mean, obviously they're not going to be dealing with the Empire in this. So maybe that's a way for them to sidestep it. I mean,
it's, it allows them to explore a different kind of genre, this gothic horror. I'm kind of with you on the symbiotes and the alien queen, where it's like, I feel like this has been done other places, and I don't know that it feels very Star Wars-y. I mean, the gothic horror element of it, they made that horror novel about, the zombie, they put zombies in Star Wars already in the EU.
Death Troopers is what it's called.
Yeah.
And Red Harvest, too.
I didn't really read that because I was like, I can't imagine that that's very interesting. That's just, hey, zombies are a thing. Can we put them in Star Wars? The gothic horror aspect of it, where maybe it's more... they talked about it in the interview on StarWars.com come a little bit, where they're trying to kind of play with some of the tropes of those things a little bit without just quoting them and trying to make them more Star Warsy. So the idea that there's this village and these villagers who are kind of wary and fearful of this big weird castle at the top of the hill, and they warn people not to go there, like that kind of stuff. I could see, yeah, maybe they can have some fun with that, but I don't know. It's getting Aphra and Luke together might be okay. One of the reasons they were trying to, or one of the ways in which they were trying to advertise this thing or play it up or make it sound more interesting is, these characters, they have no real reason to like be paired up, except in this case, Aphra needs something from Luke, and that's the only reason she's, helping him out or bringing him along. And, Luke is, trying to become a Jedi. And it's like, yeah, I guess. I just don't know. Like, Luke is such an earnest character and Aphra is very cynical. And so, you get this kind of odd couple pairing there, but I don't know that the characters are really, I just don't know that it'll work very well together. Like I could see them going overboard with that, or I don't know. I'm a little wary of this one. Like you said, I'll read it. And maybe I'll be proven wrong. I'd be happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, and that's not to say that Star Wars has, and when someone says gothic horror and symbiotes, I almost, to me that's almost telegraphing like there's going to be some body horror in this, and people getting infected and stuff. And not to say that Star Wars has never dealt with kind of body horror. Obviously, people are getting maimed right and left as a consequence of arms and legs and stuff like that. But it never feel like, I think it's never kind of crossed that line. It's always like, the threat, like we never actually see what Princess Leia's torture was like, even though we've seen depictions in all other media. And I've heard tale that in pre-production that there was a whole sequence where it was almost like where Carrie Fisher had makeup like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, but they decided it didn't work and they cut it out before they even did preliminary sketches. But, I think that's why people were a little uncomfortable with the Bor Gullet character. Bor Gullet! Because it was like, Bor Gullet! It's just this idea where it's kind of like this, it is kind of like Japanese hentai or whatever, and you're just like, oh my God, this thing's got tentacles and it's slimy and that's the body horror. And it's like you can kind of come up against it, and maybe the comic is the perfect, venue in order to try these. Definitely don't want to have something like, oh yeah, we're doing a Boba Fett movie and it's a gothic horror genre. It's a, something straight out of Hammer. And it's
right.
So, I mean, like you said, I'm cautious. I'll be all right. I'm totally okay with being proven wrong. I will eat my hat and apologize if I turn out. But again, the Death Trooper, book that was, I think I read about half of it. And again, it was very uncomfortable because it's like, I love horror movies, I love that kind of stuff. I could talk about them, but it's like, I do tend to not want to cross the streams in the idea that there was like, I remember what kind of made me jump off of that book is there was like a depiction of a Wookiee, like a child Wookiee crying about its mother dying because of a zombie. And I'm just like, I think of Wookiees as sentient dogs, and anybody who knows me knows I have like a thing about dogs dying in movies and books and stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm out. So yeah, as long as it's nothing, too gross, because like I said, I don't like crossing gross horror with Star Wars. It's like they're separate things. I enjoy them separately. They're not things like, oh, can I have these two things together? It's like, I would never want Star Wars and Star Trek to have a crossover comic,
Yeah.
So I kind of feel that way about, horror and whatnot. But again, gothic horror is a very large umbrella that encompasses anything from, James Whale's Frankenstein to, Toby Hooper's Life Force. So, whatever.
Yeah. So the other aspect of this story, So this is Kieran Gillen. Well, so Han and Leia, it won't just be Luke and Aphra. Han and Leia and Sana will eventually show up. We'll have several new villains. And according to Kieran Gillen, he says, this is such an enormous story for Aphra and Sana. We alluded to their history a little before, and now it's the chance to say, okay, we're going to put them together and make them really interact in a more extended way. They're very much a part of the emotional arc of the whole thing, and how the cats end up coming together is very much linked to Sana and Aphra, which I think is kind of interesting, actually. And I feel like if that's the thrust of it, then, maybe what you were referring to earlier, right? Making it like a Luke Aphra crossover. It's like, we just need people to buy these. Like, really, the core of this is going to be Aphra and Sana, but we can't get people to buy comics just about these two characters that we invented, so we need to give Luke something to do in there too. I'm kind of interested. They haven't touched Sana a whole lot since it was revealed that she wasn't actually married to Han.
Right.
When they say we've put them together a little bit before, we alluded to their history. They were together in the Rebel jail storyline, and there were some allusions to the fact that they had known each other, maybe had a relationship previously. And then in the Aphra comic in issue number 1, Sana is actually who she calls to hook her up with someone who can break into her mentor's vault and steal some stuff. So they knew each other at least when Aphra was a graduate student.
She used to buy weed from her in college.
Yeah, could be. Where they've been, the Sana in the last Flight of the Harbinger story arc, she was the one who was like, yeah, Leia and Han are in love with each other, and everyone's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, nah, it's pretty clear, they're in love with each other. So having her, she's still kind of around. They don't really have much for her to do right now. So for her to be brought back and actually be given something to do, I think is really interesting. And I'll be curious to see what they do with this character. Is this arc kind of the last we see of Sana for a while? Does she get, this kind of emotional note and then that's the end? Or does she stick around and is she an even bigger part of one or both of the story? Does she, with this crossover, does she move over and join the Aphra comic? And now, she hangs out in the Aphra comic doing stuff with Aphra. That's kind of where I'm more curious to see what they do with it, more so than the actual story of the gothic horror alien symbiote queen part of it.
That would be cool, because I'll be honest, it's like I've had pardon me, except for Agent Terex in the Poe Dameron comic. And I like Sana, I like Aphra. I think kind of maybe teaming them up might be it would be cool, because I've had some trouble getting, in some of the books of, the Aftermath books, the Ray Sloan and I forget the other major character. I never connected with those.
Nora Wexley.
I just never really connected with those, and because I've always had a hard time connecting, when you're reading a Star Wars book and they're just they're bringing somebody new in, and they're not really connected to any of your principles, and you're just I just don't, if they're not relating to Luke or Han or Chewbacca or whatever, it's just really hard for me to kind of etch out a place in my brain of being oh, I'm really interested where this story's going. That being said, Aphra's been established, Sana's been established. Maybe it is time to fold them off into the Aphra comic. It's you get two great, Sana has only really been ancillary, but give her a chance to kind of, they could improve the character and maybe bring a kind of more of a, because I kind of get like you said, the Aphra comic is starting to kind of maybe tilt towards the kind of an Indiana Jones, freak of the week kind of story kind of situation. And that would be, I think that would be kind of fun if you had some characters okay, well, I know these characters, they have a connection to the characters I like, therefore I'm a little bit more invested than if you opened up a comic and said, this is, this happened, 5 years before A New Hope, and this is a person and they're a rebel. And it's oh, okay, well, what connection do they have to all my favorite characters? Nothing. They've never met. And you're oh,
right.
I really have to build up. I have to spend all this time reading before I figure out whether I like them. And it's like, I kind of like them when they have a little bit of baggage that I can kind of connect to the Star Wars. So, it should be, goofy names and odd premise aside, I'll give it a fair shot. And
sure,
I mean, the people involved have shown that they can do a decent comic, so it's not like they're starting from scratch.
Right. Yeah.
So should we talk Aphra 4?
Yeah. Let's pick up with where we are with Dr. Aphra now. So issue 4 of her eponymous comic. I already said titular earlier, so I want to say eponymous. So we pick up where we left off, which is that Dr. Aphra and her crew, consisting of her father. Well, her father's kind of along for the ride. Dr. Aphra, BT and 000, the two evil droids who like torturing humans or killing humans, and then Black Kersentin, who's like the evil Wookiee that she runs with. They and Aphra's father are on Yavin 4. Her father is chasing down evidence or remnants of this group called the Ordu Aspectu, who had some kind of business with the Jedi. They were Force users, and there was like a schism between them and the Jedi at some point. The reason why is maybe up for historical debate. But they get some coordinates. They end up on Yavin 4. And of course, this is between episode 4 and episode 5. So the Imperials are there because, they brought the Death Star there. The Rebels were there. The Rebels have left. The Empire has kept a little contingent around just to kind of make sure that the Rebels don't try to come back or to scout out anything they might have left behind. The Imperials are headed up by Captain Tolvan, who is a lady with short cropped hair and like a metal around her neck and up the sides of her face. So I made a comment on Twitter. If anyone ever watched that old cartoon show from the 80s, The Silverhawks, or if you had any of the toys, she basically looks like a Silverhawk.
She does.
Which is, these people with like kind of metal costumes that flew around in space.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of them until recently, but it's kind of uncanny. The only other point of reference, I will say, she looks also a bit like a character from Aeon Flux or something like that.
Yeah, maybe a little bit,
but more of a Silverhawk.
Yeah. So in the previous issue 3, Aphra basically told Kersentin to create a distraction by beating up and killing Imperials on one side of the forest, while Aphra and her father and the droids could sneak into the temple because her father needed to take some readings from the temple, which he started doing towards the end of issue 3, and that's what they're doing at the beginning of issue 4. So the Imperials finally catch up with them. Tolvan sees where they are. Her father gets the coordinates. So they escape, but just barely. They kind of face down an AT-AT walker at one point, and then Kersentin shows up in Aphra's ship to help them escape. That's, I don't know, a good 2/3 of the issue. This one, there's action, chasing, shooting, all that good stuff. But it doesn't take that long to describe. So that's about 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of the issue. The coordinates that Aphra's father picked up take them to the Citadel of Rur. Rur, I think, was one of the Ordu Aspectu, RUR. And so it's basically an asteroid or a planetoid or something like that with a city that's been carved into it. And so they show up and they see skeletons around, and so clearly someone lived there at one point, but no longer. So that's where they leave off. Meanwhile, Captain Tolvan checks in with her superior officer, Admiral Ozzel, who you will recall from Empire Strikes Back. He's the one who brought the fleet out of light speed
too close to the
surface. Yeah. he'll end up dying himself, but he, I guess, is now in charge after Taggy was dispatched by Vader. So he's like, through that conversation, you get a little backstory. Tolven was apparently in charge of security on Edu. That didn't go well, as we saw in Rogue One. And so as punishment, she was then sent to Yavin for, basically a security detail to make sure the rebels didn't come back. What's interesting about the end of that one is that she's like, oh, we have a little more information. Admiral Oswald's like, oh, well, is it any of it, what did you find? And she's like, well, it's not really worth sharing. It's not a big deal. But then she is prepping a shuttle, and they're loading up a shuttle to go after Aphra and her folks. So she is maybe keeping something from Oswald. The Aphra's father also left behind some of the crystals he used to get the to align the thing and get the coordinates. So I don't know if that was the clue, or if they are chasing, if they were able to get the coordinates themselves, if they figured out the puzzle. But it looks like Tolven will be going after Aphra at all, and not necessarily informing her superiors of what she's doing. So that if they develop that character a little more, I think she could become interesting too, and kind of her motivations and fleshing out why she's doing that. So that was Dr. Aphra number 4. What did you think of the issue?
I liked it. It's like I said, I kind of had remarked early on that I was like, I like it, but I don't know if it's for me. I mean, I don't even know what that means when I say it, to be honest, because this issue is like a lot of good action. I mean, I'm still not a big fan of the droids. I mean, that whole shtick is kind of a sore thumb, but whatever. It's an ensemble piece. I like a lot of that. I like the action. I like the slow build. I like the way that they were able to properly integrate, these Imperial lackeys, where it's like a, an inside joke for even the minorly astute Star Wars fan, because you're seeing this guy and you're like, yeah, he'll get his. And the Edu thing for the new fans, it's kind of a nice thing. The art I like. It's obviously a bit more stylized than generally I'm into, but there's something about it that works. It's like, I will say a lot of times people seem constantly posed. Aphra, in like a lot of shots, she seems like just like a action figure pose in almost every shot. But I mean, it's an artistic choice. They're trying to, they have only a short amount of time to get their ideas across. So I kind of understand what they're doing. I mean, and it's good art. I mean, she's shooting with 2 blasters, which, that's not except for Jango Fett, that's not something you see a lot in Star Wars, when somebody's just unloading with their gun. Yeah. And I actually like, there's a little shot when Aphra and her father are confronted by the stormtroopers, and she drops her weapons, and for some reason it kind of reminds me of a shot that I wanted to see in Rogue One that didn't seem to make it, when there was a shot in the behind the scenes reel, I think, where and of course it might have fallen under Gareth Edwards, one of End of the Day kind of things, where he's just doing random action shots. But there's a shot where Cassian is actually holding a weapon, and the stormtrooper comes up really fast and has the gun in his face, and he kind of loosens his hands with the gun, like, hey, I'm dropping my weapon. And it's not used. It wasn't used in the film, obviously, and it kind of reminded me of that when I saw it. I was like, oh, that was a great. I was actually kind of, I don't know why, I was looking forward to that in Rogue One. I was like, because usually stormtroopers are just like, they shoot people, or they just kind of sneak up on you. You've never had them kind of come at somebody like some kind of a SWAT team, where come on, put your gun down kind of thing. It's like, right. So it was a little thing, and of course the twist when Black Chrysanthemum starts shooting with this, what at first I thought was an AT-AT, just because of the way it looked like the strut of the ship looked like a leg of the AT-AT, and I was confused, and then I realized, oh no, it's, I love last minute escapes in Star Wars movies.
Right. She leaps, and she barely gets her hand on the, loading door or whatever. And so she's hanging on, and her dad has to swing out and help her up. One of those kinds of escapes.
Yeah, I just love
very Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I love that. Especially Empire. When they're leaving Bespin and stuff. I mean, that kind of that aesthetic, or the Falcon escaping. I mean, these last minute escapes and grabbing and having to climb and stuff. I just love that kind of stuff in Star Wars. So to have that, it's like that's. I mean, those are the little bits and pieces of Star Wars that always make me go, okay, we're in the right place. we're going in the right direction. Even though the ship's kind of got a weird, like a very un-Star Warsy design, but I'm cool with it. It's
the ship. I have a hard time figuring out what it actually looks like sometimes, because from different angles it looks like completely different ships. So it's kind of the front of it is sort of like the Slave One, Boba Fett ship, in that. Right. Kind of it's that vertical look to it, but then it has the different engines behind it, and sometimes it has these like poles sticking out, like in a fan kind of configuration between there. So I have a hard time figuring out sometimes just what it fully looks like.
Yeah, it's a ship,
and it can make, and like you said, depending on how they have to position it to fit within the frame for what the action is, it can look awkward, or it can look. It can make the action look a little confusing because it's just such a weird shape.
Well, to actually make a reference to something that you had said on Twitter recently, it's a ship design that would not have been out of place in the Roger Corman classic Battle Beyond the Stars.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, and for people, people who have not seen that, you need to, if you have a taste for early 80s low budget sci-fi that consistently tries to ape Star Wars, it would behoove you to check that one out.
Yeah.
At least that's what the Varda say. That's what the Varda says. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so with Aphra, I find myself kind of like, when I read the individual issue, like, I liked it. It was okay. I like what they're doing with the story, but the individual issue itself might seem fragmented, or it's like, oh, is that all it was? But when I've gone back and read all four in succession, I think the arc of what they're doing is a little more satisfying, and you can kind of see where they're going. Because there's that one issue where they spent so much time telling the story, competing versions of who the Ordo Aspectu was. And you're like, all right, well, that took up a lot of this issue, and okay, whatever. And this one, 2/3 of it is just this. They're kind of trying to find their way out of the temple and being chased by the Imperials. And while the action and the artwork is good, in terms of just reading through it, it's like, okay, still being chased. And like, yep, they're going to run that way. And then that way is going to be blocked. And they have to go out that way, and that way will be blocked. Yep, that's what's happening. But, if you take it all together, I think it works pretty well.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's only where this is issue 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a lot of room to, starting kind of at a deficit of not having, any big characters in it, even though that they have a connection. It's, it's starting pretty strong. It's probably like my favorite ancillary non Skywalker saga comic out, or material even out there, although the crossover is coming. So
yeah,
it'll be tied into that.
Yeah.
So we have.
I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Do you want to talk about
look at the time.
The aftermath excerpts?
Yeah, you could.
I guess we can just note.
You can talk. We can talk about it a little bit. Yeah.
All right. On Valentine's Day, StarWars.com had a lot of content devoted to Han and Leia and their relationship and the best moments between them in the films, and various associated content. And so then at one point they also posted a new excerpt from the third and final Aftermath novel, Empire's End, which comes out in a week. And so this excerpt is Han and Leia at home. Leia's pregnant. Han is kind of hovering. He shows up with like a sack full of fruit because the doctors said she should eat more fruit, but she's like, they didn't tell me to replace everything with fruit. It's pretty clear that he's bored and doesn't really know what to do with himself. Luke is off doing whatever he's doing. So Han's bored and he's at home, and so he's just kind of hovering around Leia and telling her, well, maybe she needs to start taking it a little slower, and there are references to the attack on Chandrila and or Chandrila, whatever you pronounce it. The fact that Mon Mothma is kind of hurt and maybe a little out of commission for now. So I feel like there's a lot of, hey, let's explain where we are. There's a lot of exposition and backstory, which I don't know how far into the book it is. Maybe it's early enough, but for people who like Han and Leia and who want to know more about that period, like maybe they like it. For me, Chuck Wendig's writing style, there will always be, there'll be people who like it, people who don't. I think, my position on it was, for the first Aftermath book, I thought it was fine. I didn't love it, but it was fine. The second book, I didn't really like as much. I thought the writing got a little worse. This one here, this excerpt at least, or we had gotten a previous excerpt about Lando and Lobot, and there I thought the writing was fine. This one, it's a little rougher. I think what happened, or at least my take on it from the second book, which I'm blanking on the name of the subtitle or whatever, but that second book, it had Nora Wexley and her band of rebels, as well as Han and Chewbacca, and I feel like Wendig has a better handle, or his writing of kind of his original characters is a little better than his writing of the original trilogy kind of star characters. That something about his writing style, it just doesn't quite fit the voice of Han and Leia as we know them from the movies, right? And that's
right.
You could say, okay, that's fine. It's just a different take on the character, but you and I have talked about this a lot of times where it still has to kind of ring true to you, and it still has to kind of sync up a little bit with those performances, because those are what, you kind of hear the way Harrison Ford talks as Han Solo in your head. You kind of hear, the way that Carrie Fisher talks as Princess Leia in your head. And so then when dialogue comes along that's a little clunkier, or, it's like, yeah, Han Solo wouldn't use vocabulary like that, or something like that, and it just feels a little off. And that's kind of how I felt about this excerpt. But like I said, maybe the rest of the book about Nora Wexley and everyone else, it'll be better. I don't know.
Yeah, it's and again, I'm probably beating a dead horse, because I'm sure I've said this every other time. It's just something about the focus of this trilogy is just, and I don't blame Chuck Wendig for that, because I know that they tell you, you can offer a synopsis, but Lucas Books probably had an idea of what kind of story they wanted to tell. And they found a guy that might write for that idiom. I will say I don't like the idiom at all. Why have we relegated these characters that essentially, since they've rebooted the universe, we're now back at, zero, thinking like, well, what have they been doing for 30 years? And it was beautiful for them to be able to do that in the movie, and kind of like, not, but now that we're post movie and it's fine to start bringing in this ancillary material, like, why are they so, all this could have been achieved in a very, in one book. It focused. I want to know what's up with Lando, or could have been another trilogy, and they could have maybe held off and just said, we're not doing a book before the movie. And then when the movie came out and we established where everybody's at, then you could start filling it in. But it's the kind of like halting, kind of like, we get a little window into where they've been. I understand that they don't want to explain Luke's development of his second academy. We don't want to get into the inner workings of Ben Solo and what happened with him and Snoke. I understand that you don't want to give that away when you've got 2 more movies coming out. But why not just say, hey, let's deal with what happened the year after the Death Star blew up. And I feel like it's like, you're not you don't have to deal with Leia being pregnant and having kind of the problem that kind of happened in some of the early trilogies when it's like, oh, it's a book, we can do anything. Yeah, let's make Leia pregnant the entire time and completely limit her ability to participate in the action sequences that she's now, now that we don't have restrictions of technology, of CGI and stuff, we can just do whatever we want. But then they still kind of kept her barefoot and pregnant in all those trilogies. And then they kind of I feel like they're doing it. They did this again, and they hamstring the story by making, in the first one, Han Solo and Chewbacca be guests in their own universe. It's that kind of like, why didn't they talk about, they were able to kind of touch on some of like the birth of the First Order in Princess Leia Bloodline, which I thought was interesting. It was a nice way of, I felt like I understood where things were in the Star Wars galaxy in The Force Awakens a lot better because of it. And then I think it was a great opportunity for them to be able to show, how did the old regime die down? Was it, it wasn't a thing where, like the way George kind of used to like to make it act like somehow the explosion of that second Death Star led to this just kind of spontaneous revolt of the populace, and whatever, but they never really explained it. They, even the ancillary books later on would kind of, I guess the first scene in Aftermath is a reaction to that riot, the spontaneous riot. So I will give Chuck that credit for that. The fact that, yes, people got shot after they toppled the Palpatine statue. It wasn't just like, all the stormtroopers put their guns down and it's like, oh, all we were waiting was for somebody to tell us we could quit. I'm sorry, I'm going way off. But my point is that I would have loved to have a book with my favorite characters, with Lando and all those people doing something together. And I don't feel like I feel like they could have done it in a way that didn't step on the toes of anything anybody else is doing. If they kept it like right after Jedi era, and then they could have, it would have could have ended with this battle of Jakku that would have, whet people's appetite for The Force Awakens. But instead, we've got these we've got little, what do they call it? Interludes.
Right.
And like I said, I don't blame Chuck because I understand that they probably told him he couldn't cover certain aspects. And that there's like, yeah, you really need to, there's actually some evidence if you're saying that you're not particularly, neither one of them have been particularly wowed with Chuck's take on the characters. It almost makes me wonder if maybe the restrictions placed upon him were so heavy that maybe he put all of his energy into his characters as a reaction.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I just feel like the whole Aftermath series is a complete, it's completely lost on me.
Misfire.
You know what I mean? I'm just not gonna.
Yeah. I think the events that happen in the books are kind of interesting in terms of where they're taking this universe, compared to what they did with the EU, but the actual implementation of it, the way it's written, it's like, maybe they could have done this a slightly different way. One of the things I do think is interesting is that, in the EU, they were at this point too, where Leia was pregnant, or even before she was pregnant, I guess, they were part of the New Republic. She was part of this government. Han was there. He had given up his smuggling lifestyle, so he was bored then as well. But then, in the EU, they had him kind of like leave at the drop of the hat. He would like pick up Luke and be like, "Hey, I need to blow this popsicle stand for a couple weeks. Come with me." And Luke would be like, "Yeah, whatever." And then they would go off and do something together. Whereas here, it seems like he's still bored, but they're having him kind of stay closer to home and not get into trouble. Maybe other stories will come along later that will show that, well, actually he was up to some shenanigans, but and so the way they flip that is interesting. Before I read this excerpt, I had been thinking a little bit about the EU and thinking about, taking stock of where we are and in this new canon era and us with the show and kind of thinking about, all of these petitions to bring EU characters back and use storylines from the EU and should we have an X-Wing movie and make it like the X-Wing novels and all this. And I was thinking about the EU and granted I read them when I was middle school, high school, so emotionally, mentally, maturity, whatever wise, it was different than I am now. I think up to a certain point I enjoyed them at the time, but even then I don't think I ever thought there was like great writing or whatever. I was like, oh, so this is what they're doing with Star Wars. Cool. I like Star Wars. I don't know that a lot of it is really held up that well.
Yeah.
Like the Searook and, certainly, when you start talking about like Callista and the Darksaber book and the whatever, the star, the Vonda McIntyre.
Oh yeah. The Crystal Star.
I'm not even talking about those that were like, people didn't like them at the time. I mean, even some of the Timothy Zahn ideas, it's...
Oh, yeah, his Future of the Past or whatever, Spectre of the Past. That
Spectre of the Past.
Duology is just terrible.
I mean, but even the ideas in them, they haven't really gone to cloning, which was such a huge part of the EU for a while, not just with Zahn, but with the Dark Empire comic series. Somewhat, I think Paulo Hidalgo made a joke at one point that Snoke was Trioculus, which, remember Trioculus? He was like the clone son of, I don't even know if he was a clone, but he was like the son of Palpatine who had a third eye from some mutation or something.
Well, I don't know if I remember that one. Was that a comic or a book?
I think that might have been a comic.
Well, I know they love to bring him back and stuff. Yeah,
right. The three-eyed mutant warlord who declared himself emperor at one point.
Yeah,
and I guess it was both comics and novels, maybe. But so there are clearly some ideas in the EU, and that, and given how eventually like everything just kind of got woven together and tied together in the EU, I think you can say the EU in general, and not just the specific writing, but kind of the ideas in them. And the plots and the stories and where they took a lot of those characters, I just don't think it holds up that well as being very interesting. Like it feels, so much of it feels dated to me as like a very kind of like late 90s science fiction-y kind of thing. Whereas I feel like, and it's still early days, and so by the time you get 10 years deep into this thing, they could be like, well, let's bring back cloning and let's make a Trioculus movie. Who knows? But I kind of doubt it. Yeah, I feel like they have kind of a, there's a firmer hand guiding all of these stories. And so it's, when you have 6 people kind of running this ship, or however many people are on the story group, it has to be something that all of them get behind, which means, in theory, at least, the ideas are a little stronger and maybe a little more enduring. And so, I mean, it's as much as I have fun reading some of those EU books, rereading some of those EU books. As much as I like some of them, I don't ever really find myself pining for like, oh, if only they bring back, Bria Tar, what's her name? Bria Lauren or damn, what's her name from the Han Solo?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Bria Thorne.
It's been a while since I've read those.
I never am like, oh, let's bring back Garrus Shrike, or let's bring back, this Isen Isard, or it's like, yeah, just kind of leave them where they were. They were moving forward, creating new characters and stories that hopefully will, not be as dated 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I kind of got burnt out on EU books around, and I would kind of pick and choose partly as well. I didn't read the Black Fleet Crisis. I read some of it and didn't like it. I think the last time I was super into these reading like trilogies was around the Carillion trilogy or something like that. But yeah, it's a lot of this kind of like where you weren't getting like great writing, super. I mean, I was in college at the time, and I was reading, Shakespeare and Jonathan Swift and stuff. And so really Star Wars books were just kind of a way to kind of decompress of having to be like, I don't really have to pay close attention to this. But even back then it was like, I was always happier when it was just the main characters. And I didn't like it when they would, split them off all the time. And it's like, I would jokingly on our Twitter, I will sometimes randomly put up a screen cap of a page from the old Marvel comic books, mainly to remind myself, because I have a tendency to, especially when we do comics reviews, I go around and I kind of go, oh, this isn't like the old Marvel times. But then if you really read it, it's like, oh, there's a lot of, bad tropes and bad ideas and people trying to just, in the same way that I'm giving, Screaming Citadel crap, and I haven't even read it, for doing gothic horror. Well, the old Marvel did a run where it was they did an entire thing, which was, all it was is a ripoff of John Carter of Mars. Yeah. And it was perspective, I feel like I'm not going to crap all over the new EU. I don't even know what they call it, but I guess my point is it's I just wish they had learned from some of their mistakes, but I think maybe they are being cautious, and maybe that's why the Aftermath trilogy didn't resonate with me, because I didn't feel like the stakes were high, and everything I read about it was oh, there's a lot of people in here that I don't know, and I don't know, I'm not compelled. And so maybe it was it was dealing with some big stuff, but it was kind of in a low stakes way. You never were well, what's going to happen to, maybe we're going to find out that this is what ruined Han and Leia's marriage or something like that. It's right. I don't know. It's a balance, and I understand that they want to attract new, young readers, and maybe young kids have a different need. They want different things from their Star Wars books. So, I'll always try to give these things a chance, but I'm not going to sit here and go, oh yeah, I love it all.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of my points, I think I lost track of my point, but the Aftermath books, the way they read, I think is going to end up being a little dated, but hopefully the groundwork that they're laying and kind of their piece of the puzzle for everything else will kind of help them stand up in the future. But reading some of these things, my worry is that, a couple of years, 10, 20 years from now, there'll be blog posts about some of the worst ideas of the new canon, and a bunch of them are going to be from the Aftermath books. It's I don't know that we needed this goofy Mr. Bones battle droid fight scene or whatever, and who knows? I mean, some people I'm sure love them and connecting with Nora Wexley and certainly Ray Sloan. I think, I'm on record as being pro Ray Sloan, and I am interested to see how this wraps up and how it resolves with the Battle of Jakku. But like I said, it's kind of the events that are more interesting to me, and I just kind of wish that they had been, like you were saying, that they had just been presented in a different way.
Yeah. And that being said, I guess we should wrap up. I will say somebody suggested that they really enjoyed the Rogue One novelization by Alexander Freed, and I have not dipped into that, and I should.
I did read it, actually.
Oh.
It's good. I mean, it doesn't really add a whole lot above and beyond what you see in the movie. Some of them, the scenes in the book maybe pick up a few minutes before the scene in the movie. So, in the beginning at the Ring of Kefrene, right, when Cassian Andor shows up to meet that guy who has the information, you get a little bit about he had just gotten, a little more about how he got to that point and what he was thinking. But beyond that, I mean, kind of what you see in the movie is the story. So, it's well written. I think Freed's a decent writer of this kind of thing. There aren't any real clunkers like apparently you had with the Force Awakens novelization, but I also wouldn't say that it is required reading
okay.
to really appreciate the movie, you know.
Well, listeners, dedicated our faithful listeners, if you have something you like, if you have a thought about these books, or like, what do you guys like in a book? Do you even read these things? Is it not, you're like, I don't even care? Let us know.
Yeah.
Hosts, that's host with an S, at talkingbirdcast.com. We'd love to hear your take on stuff. We're on Twitter at talkingbirdcast on Twitter. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com. We also have an Amazon affiliate link, and how that works is if you go to www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, it takes you right to Amazon.com with one caveat. Anything you purchase, Amazon kicks back a little bit of how much money you spend back to us to help support hosting the show. Doesn't cost you anything extra, and we always appreciate it when you do so. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, again, 75 episodes. Thanks so much to everyone who's been listening for that 75.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like 75. It feels like
more coming.
I feel like we're at 23.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of hours of us, and I don't want to minimize the my appreciation of that you would go and listen to me blather. And I know especially today I've been blathering, but on some level I hope that's entertaining. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the force be with you.